Section 31 of Journal of the Reverend Francis Asbury, Volume 2. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Brian Keenan. Monday, 23. I rode to Rehoboth Chapel, in the Sinks of Greenbrier, where we held conference with a few preachers. Here I delivered 2 discourses. Thursday crossed Greenbrier River and had to pass along a crooked and dangerous path to Benton's. My mind is in peace. Friday, 27. I felt myself very heavy, my mind unprepared for the congregation at Gilboa Meeting House, and could not preach with any satisfaction. After meeting the society, I came away much clouded. We came off from Brother C's about 4 o'clock, aiming at the Little Levels. But darkness came on, and we had to climb and blunder over the point of a mountain, in descending which my feet were so squeezed that the blood was ready to gush out of the pores. I could hardly help weeping out my sorrow. At length we came to Brother H's, where the kindness of the family was a cordial, and we went to rest about 10 o'clock, and all was well. Sunday, 29. I was very warm in body and mind at M. Neal's. In the afternoon, contrary to my sentiment and practice on the Lord's Day, we took our departure, purposing to reach Morgantown on Wednesday evening in order to attend an appointment made for me on Thursday, the 2nd of June. We reached my old friend Drinnan's, who received us gladly and entertained us kindly. Next day, Monday, we opened our campaign through the mountains, following a path I had thought never to travel again. Frequently we were in danger of being plucked off our horses by the boughs of the trees under which we had to ride. About 7 o'clock, after crossing 6 mountains and many rocky creeks and fords of Elk and Monongalia rivers, we made the Valley of Distress, called by the natives Tiger's Valley. We had a comfortable lodging at Mr. White's, and here I must acknowledge the kindness and decency of the family, and their readiness to duty, sacred and civil. Thence we hastened on at the rate of 42 miles a day. We had to ride 4 miles in the night, and went supperless to the puncheons, where we slept a little on hard lines. After encountering many difficulties, known only to God and ourselves, we came to Morgantown. I doubt whether I shall ever request any person to come and meet me at the levels of Greenbrier, or to accompany me across these mountains again, as Brother D. Hitt has now done. Oh, how checkered is life! How thankful ought I to be that I am here safe, with life and limbs, in peace and plenty, at kind Brother S.'s. Pennsylvania, Thursday, June 2. I gave them a discourse on Work Out Your Own Salvation with Fear and Trembling. I had 6 preachers and a congregation of serious hearers, and some wept. I was informed of an awful circumstance. A man aged 70 years strangled his own son to prevent his appearing as evidence against him for theft. Thursday, 9. We crossed Great Yahogany and came to Connellstown, where we had a good time. I preached on Acts 3:26. Sister C., who professed to find peace 6 or 7 years ago, when I prayed with her, was now sick. I gave her counsel and medicine, and trust I left her better in soul and body. Saturday, 11. I rode to Uniontown, and after a solemn meeting, I sat in conference with the preachers. Monday, 13. We left Uniontown, and rode about 35 miles, and the next day 45 to J.F.'s. Maryland, Wednesday, 15. I came to Old Town, and preached to a few people at Brother J. J. Jacobs's, and the next day rode nearly 40 miles to Father F.'s. Friday, 17. We rode 42 miles, and were weary enough. Saturday, 18. I came to Brother S. Phillips's, and was glad to lay me down and rest, having ridden about 200 miles on uneven roads in 5 days and a half. Sunday 19. I was musing in my own mind how I could best spend the morning of that day. I concluded to call the family into the room and address them pointedly, one by one, concerning their souls. I did so, and hope it was not in vain. In the afternoon I preached on the 23rd Psalm. Tuesday 21. I preached in Fredericktown at 10 o'clock and at Libertytown at 5 o'clock. Wednesday 22. I had some life at the new meeting house on the ridge. I borrowed a horse to ride 9 miles, and then made out to get to Baltimore. Oh, what times are here! The academy is crowded. They have 5 teachers, and nearly 200 scholars. I will now take a view of my journey for some months past. From the best judgment I can form, the distance is as follows. For Baltimore to Charleston, South Carolina, 1,000 miles. Thence up the state of South Carolina, 200 miles. From the center to the west of Georgia, 200 miles. Through North Carolina, 100 miles. Through the state of Tennessee, 100 miles. Through the west of Virginia, 300 miles. Through Pennsylvania and the west of Maryland and down to Baltimore, 400 miles. I was employed in town as usual in preaching and meeting the classes, etc. I continued in town until Thursday 30, and then set off, and came in the evening to Esquire G's, our ancient lodging, and was received with their usual kindness. Friday, July 1. Came to Abingdon, and saw the walls of Cokesbury with some pain of mind. We came in the evening to Mr. Dallam's, whose house was the first home I had in these parts. Sister Dallam is worn out with affliction, but her confidence in God continues, and appears to grow stronger. Saturday and Sunday, 2-3. I attended Cecil Quarterly Meeting, and spent Monday 4th at Mr. Bassett's. I was so unwell that if my company had not been entertaining, I should have been in bed. Wednesday 6. We had a solemn season at Dudley's Chapel. It was like a Sabbath. Thursday 7. I rode to Choptank, now Greensboro, through excessive heat. S. Cook was watching for me, and when I came she could hardly bear my presence. She seemed as deeply affected as if I had been her father, knowing the great affection that subsisted between her deceased father and myself. I am now happy that it is not in me to weep as do others, or I might never wipe my eyes. I preached on Isaiah 57, 18-21. Sunday 10. I went to meeting under great heaviness, and there was some among the people. I dined with William Moore, where I prophesied 17 years ago. How few are left now that heard me then. Monday 11. The heat has been for some time, and still is, excessive. I doubt if it be not equal to that in Georgia and the islands. We rode 15 miles to Quanti's Chapel, where we had a number of gay people, but it appeared as if they did not understand or even hear what I said. We have reason to praise God for an abatement of the heat of the weather, which, had it continued, would have been insupportable. We had excessive rain, attended with thunder and lightning. We came to Snow Hill, on Pocomoke River. I called on the weeping widow Bowen, whose late husband, after being the principal in building a house for divine worship, died in peace. Here I met about 1,000 people. Being unable to command the congregation from the pulpit, I stood in one of the doors, and preached to those who were out of the house. I rode 8 miles to the seashore. When we came near, we felt the cool sea breeze very powerfully. I lodged with S. Evans, whose house I visited 16 years ago. Here are 2 people above 70 years of age, who have lived together 48 years. Tuesday 19. We rode 40 miles to Lewistown. We stopped to dine near H's Grand Mill Seat. My spirits of late keep up greatly, not being subject to depression as heretofore. It cleared away about noon, and gave us the opportunity of riding 2 miles out of Lewistown, after preaching to the brethren and the Africans. I dined with Mr. Shanklin, whose house was the first that was opened to me in this place. We then urged our way up the county, and escaped the rain until we came within 2 miles of Milford. It then poured down very heavily, and we came in dripping about 8 o'clock. Friday, 22. We had a living love feast. Many opened their mouths, but spoke too much of what was past. We had an exceeding great company, to whom I preached on Isaiah 62:12. The 2 following days, Saturday and Sunday, I attended Dover Quarterly Meeting, where I suppose we had nearly 2,000 people. It was a living open season. There was great sweetness and love among the brethren. Monday, 25. About 35 minutes before I began meeting, I received the last loving request of our dear brother William Jessup, which was to preach his funeral sermon. I had my difficulties in speaking, and the people in hearing, of a man so well known and so much beloved. He was always solemn, and few such holy, steady men have been found amongst us. I stopped at Middletown, Wilmington, and Chester, on my way to Philadelphia. Pennsylvania, Thursday, 28. I preached on Psalm 23:24. I have thought that we should preach as if we expected no help from the people, yea, as if we believed that enemies of God and us were in the congregation. I began meeting classes in the city. I had some pleasure in receiving news of a revival of religion in the South, likewise from the Eastern States. But there are great failures among the preachers on account of health, etc., preventing their traveling and standing to the work. Brother Blanton has given me an account of the late fire in Charleston, and says that about 500 houses are destroyed. Saturday, 30. I began reading Mr. Fletcher's Portrait of St. Paul. The notes are significant, and show what a minister of the gospel ought to be, and what he may be through grace. Sunday, 31. I had some life and more liberty at Ebenezer in the morning at 5 o'clock. I must needs attend the Second African Church. And at 7:30 o'clock, in the great unwieldy house and congregation in 4th Street, I preached on John 1:17. Monday, August 1. I drew the outlines of a subscription that may form a part of a constitution of a general fund, for the sole purpose of supporting the traveling ministry. To have respect, first, to the single men that suffer and are in want. Secondly, to the married traveling preachers. Thirdly, to the worn-out preachers. Fourthly, the widows and orphans of those who have lived and died in the work. And fifthly, to enable the yearly conference to employ more married men. And finally, to supply the wants of all the traveling preachers, under certain regulations and restrictions, as the state of the fund will admit. Thursday, 4. I was called upon by the African Society in Campington to open their new house, which I did, on Romans 1:16-18, and had an unwieldy congregation of white and black. Brother D. gave a lively exhortation on the new birth. Friday, 5. Having concluded on the presentation of the subscription, I hasted with it from house to house. After dinner we came to Germantown, where I preached in the academy at 6 o'clock to a large congregation of women. I lodged once more at the house of Mother Steele and her daughter Lusby, having had an acquaintance of 22 years. New Jersey, Sunday, 7. It being rainy in the morning, my congregation was not very large at Trenton. I preached on Isaiah 62:10. 1. the charge to the ministry to go through the gates as ministers and Christians. 2. Prepare the way, removing all the difficulties. 3. Cast up the highway, repentance, regeneration, and sanctification. 4. Gather out the stones, wicked ministers and people. 5. Set up the standard, that is, form the Christian church. Give the standard of Christian doctrine and experience. In the afternoon I preached on Hebrews 10:38. It is a dry time, and we cannot get along. I was sorry I did not preach in the street. Monday 8. We directed our course through the Jerseys towards New York, passing through Pennytown and along an agreeable, well-improved part of the country. Tuesday 9. We made our way 25 miles to Brother Emculla's, near Schooley's Mountain, properly a remnant of the Blue Ridge. After a good meeting at Brother M.C.'s, we went to lay the foundation of a new meeting house. We sung part of Dr. Watts's hymn on the cornerstone, and prayed. I then had to lend a hand to lay the mighty cornerstone of the house. We then sung and prayed, and retired to Brother Bud's, an Israelite indeed, my never-failing friend in time, and I hope will be to all eternity. Wednesday 10. I thought it good not to be idle, so I went to Hackettstown and preached on "The promise is to you and to your children," etc. We had few people, but a feeling serious time. Thence we rode to Dover, where we had many people at a short warning. I admired the solemnity of the women. The men appeared to be outdone with the heat and labors of the day. Friday 12. We rode 20 miles to Brother Dickinson's. He is now an official character among us, and can remember, when he was a child, how godly men came to the house of his father, preaching, praying, and talking about religion, as was the case at my father's house when I was a child. Saturday 13. I rode to Elizabethtown, where I preached. The next day I met the classes. Having heard many things of Mr. Austin, many of which were very wild, I went and heard for myself. He explained the 22nd chapter of the Revelation of Jesus Christ to St. John, and applied it to the millennium and reign of Christ upon earth, his foretelling the time and place of the coming and kingdom of Christ, General Washington being Zerubbabel, and himself Joshua the high priest, and the plowing up of a certain field. All this appeared to me like wildness of the brain. Monday 15. We rode to New York. Whilst crossing the ferry, some foolish, wicked people uttered so many damns that I was a little afraid the Lord would sink the boat. I asked a man if he had any chalk to lend me, that I might mark down the curses the company gave us on our passage of 30 or 40 minutes. I was taken up in meeting classes and visiting from house to house a good deal of my time in the day, and I frequently preached at night. I read Watson's Apology for the Bible. Sunday 21. I went over to Brooklyn, where we have a small society. I had very few hearers except those who came from the city. I administered the sacrament, and we had some life. We then returned to the city, where I preached in the afternoon to about 1,600 people, some of whom were wicked and wild enough. The preachers had pity upon me, and desired me to preach only twice this Sabbath. In my own soul I feel happy, but on account of the Church of God and poor sinners, awful. It appears as necessary to preach conviction and conversion among our own as among other congregations. Oh, when will the Lord appear as in ancient times? Monday 22. I met 3 living classes, several among whom professed perfect love. The weather is excessively warm and dry. People are sickly and dying, especially children. I find my body very weak. Preaching at night, added to the mosquitoes, causes me to sleep very little. Wednesday 24. We have still very great heat. It appears to me to be unhealthy, judgment weather. I feel almost spent. I generally walk 3 or 4 miles a day, pray 10 or 12 times, in the congregation, families, and classes. My sleep is interrupted with pain and heat. Thursday, 25. I was much fatigued in meeting classes and visiting from house to house. But the Lord was present to bless, which gave me consolation. In the evening we had a full house. I was uncommonly assisted in preaching, and there was much weeping in the congregation. It is impossible to preach to these people till you are well acquainted with them. But here I have no continuing city. Next week I go hence. Sunday, 28. I preached in the morning at the old church, in the afternoon at the new church, on Hebrews 2:3, and in the evening at the old church again on Revelations 3:2-3, besides meeting 6 classes in the course of the day. In general, I have had no extraordinary assistance in preaching of late. Brother L. preached twice in the north end of Broadway. The congregation appeared serious and attentive. Notwithstanding the labors of the day were considerable, I was not much wearied. In meeting the society, I observed to them that they knew but little of my life and labors, unless in the pulpit, family, or class meetings; that they were unacquainted with my labors even in that city, much less could they tell where I had been, and what I had been doing for 1 year. Tuesday, 30. I delivered my concluding discourse on Isaiah 57:18. 1. The penitent backslider. 2. The Lord hath seen his ways. 3. Healing him. 4. Leading him. 5. Restoring comforts to him. We had some serious feeling souls at our meeting. Wednesday, 31. I had a meeting with the leaders in close conference, and found it necessary to explain some parts of our discipline to them, particularly that of the right of preachers to expel members, when tried before the society or a select number, and found guilty of a breach of the law of God and our rules; and that if an appeal were made, it should be brought before the quarterly meeting conference, composed of traveling and local preachers, leaders, and stewards, and finally be determined by a majority of votes. I found it also needful to observe there was such a thing as heresy in the church, and I know not what it is if it be not to deny the Lord that bought them, and the eternity of the punishment of the damned, as is virtually done by the Universalists. Schism is not dividing hypocrites from hypocrites, formal professors from people of their own caste. It is not dividing nominal Episcopalians from each other, nominal Methodists from nominal Methodists, or nominal Quakers from nominal Quakers, etc. But schism is the dividing real Christians from each other, and breaking the unity of the Spirit. I met the trustees, and after going hither and thither, and being much spent with labor through the day, I gave them a discourse at the new house, in the evening, on Acts 20:32. My attempt was feeble but faithful. Friday, September 2. I left the city, stopped at Father Oakley's, 20 miles from New York, where a few people came together, to whom I preached on Acts 4:12, and at night I was enabled to take a little rest. Saturday, 3. Notwithstanding the rain, I rode 12 miles to the White Plains quarterly meeting, where I enlarged on Ephesians 6:13-18, being Paul's exhortation to the use of the whole armor of God. I was in great heaviness through temptation and infirmity of body. I lodged with Elijah Crawford. This house is for God. Sunday, 4. I was very low, but attended the love feast. I stood in one of the windows and preached very loud to a large congregation on Hebrews 12:25. There were some feeling, gracious souls present. I was desired to preach in Bedford, but declined it for several reasons. I cannot stand such constant exertions. I have felt very severe pain in one of my shoulders, much like that I experienced after Cecil quarterly meeting. I lodged with Brother Davis, where we had the company of one who may be a disciple of mine. I hope to see him yet in the kingdom of grace and glory. If he should live to read these lines, he will know whom I mean. End of section 31. Recording by Brian Keenan.